Hey friends, Raul Jimenez here with the Shredder Group. I'm blessed to be with Matt Gessner with Guaranteed Inspection Services, and we're here to talk about the process. What does it look like and all the things that go into it? People say that the inspection is a nervous time, not only to find out that there's something wrong with the house, but for the sellers and buyers to kind of mutually agree on what's right and what's wrong. So Matt, he's my go-to. He's been my go-to for a long time, and I'm blessed to have you here today. So kind of talk to me about what to expect in a typical inspection.
So thanks for having me first.
Absolutely.
Great to be here. I don't know what to expect. They're all different. Every single one is different. And I've been fortunate. I've done it over 30 years, about 20,000 inspections.
Oh, wow.
And you're surprised every single time. The house is the most consistent. The people are all different.
Right.
Which is good. And it's one of the reasons that we encourage the client to be there when they can, at least for a portion of the inspection, because we can help them understand the property. Because we can understand the property, but it's a whole different thing to get them to understand the property. You go to a house that's 20 years old versus 2 years old, you're going to expect different things.
Sure.
You go to a house that's 100 years old, and we have some of those downtown. Very interesting if it's never been renovated, or if it has been renovated, trying to put that together and figure out the renovation schedule, if you will, if they did it 20 years ago. We're always going back to the TREC standards, the Texas Real Estate Commission standards.
Right.
That's our guidebook, if you will, for how we do the inspection. And that gives us what we have to do and what we're required to do.
One of the things I love about you and your company is whenever I have a first-time home buyer, you just mentioned you invite them to the house. But what Matt does and his team does is they actually break it down and say, look, this is what I found. These are the big ticket items. These are the red flags. So what do you do special for first-time home buyers?
The communication, because that's key. Going back, we try to encourage them to be there. They're not necessarily going to participate in the inspection, although some want to.
Right.
We'll keep them out of the attic, and off the roof. But for first-time people, especially, we want to help them understand the maintenance of what they're going to expect on the house. So the easiest one is air filters. Where they are, what their maintenance schedule should look like on the air filters.
Okay.
Because that's probably the number one overlooked issue on a house. I don't want to say misunderstood, but it's definitely overlooked. And if you do overlook it, that system is not going to perform well for you, and you're going to figure it out eventually, but it may be when the unit breaks down because you didn't change that filter. So, and there's other maintenance items they need to be aware of. The GFCI reset always comes up, right? Like, where are my GFCI resets? Because when you lose power in a bathroom, sometimes to that new homeowner, it doesn't make sense that you have to go somewhere else to reset it.
Right.
So we identify those for them and walk them around and show them where those are.
When I go list a house, I kind of look at the big ticket items, the HVAC, the roof, or I try to see the roof from the side at least, the water heater, make sure it's to code, and electrical panel, things like that. What are the biggest components that you see that, buyers are just, caught off guard by?
Usually it's things out of sight.
Okay.
For them. So it's roof and attic issues that they're completely unaware of. And the attic, you're going houses that nobody's been in that attic for a long time, depending on what's up there. And so you'll uncover some things that maybe the current owner doesn't know about, from animal entry issues to electrical issues to water penetration, because that's really the best location to find water penetration issues is the attic. I think they say the average roof leak won't show up for 3 to 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Because you have a sloped roof and the water comes through, it's going to run down, and it may or may not drip to the ceiling inside. But in the attic, you're going to see it if you're going through your process in the attic area. So probably the biggest surprises come in those. And then the others are mechanical, heating and air conditioning. And we take a pretty deep dive into heating and mechanical. I've done AC work for about 18 years in the San Antonio area. So we train our guys a little bit heavier in that and kind of push towards it to try to head off surprises to the clients after they move in.
Okay. And what is a typical inspection time process work? What is your lead time to actually when you're in? Because when we go under contract, we have that option period, right? 7, 10 days, sometimes even 3, depending on what the deal is. What is a typical process? How does it work? How do our buyers get a hold of your company?
So the easiest way is to call, because there's a little bit of dialogue back and forth we want, but they can text and email.
And then the timeline when you're actually in the house, what does that kind of typically look like?
So at least 2 hours.
Okay.
I don't know how you could go through. A vacant house is a little bit easier because you're not bouncing around furniture,
right?
And the belongings, but it's at least 2 hours, and it could go, depending on the size of the house and the components, it could go up to 5 hours, 6 hours. But 2 to 3 hours is an average. If you're much shorter than 2 hours, it's hard to do a full inspection.
Makes sense.
So we try to schedule 3-hour blocks.
Okay. And one of the things I love about your company is y'all do a quick turnaround as far as getting the report back to me, which is great because then I can actually start diving into it and doing my due diligence to see what we can fight, what we can't fight, how much money we might need. So what is your typical turnaround time? I know it, but the folks at home might not know it.
So we can turn them around same day. We can have them out by that afternoon or that evening. We do a proof on them before they go out, so they don't just go out straight from the inspector. It's for typos and to make sure everything's filled out right. At the latest, it's usually the next morning by 8 a.m. That's when it goes out. We'll have some special circumstances that they need to drag on, whether it's for additional information or there's something else on it. Commercial inspections it might take a little bit longer because of the components on it, but it's usually by 8 a.m. the next morning.
Okay, so this is a wild one. Is there anything you do not look at in a house when you do an inspection? Is there something that's just not on the card or anything that you're just going to kind of oversee?
Good question. It's so first, the inspection's visible and accessible components.
Okay.
So if we can't get access to it, if something's locked up, we can't get access to it. Obviously, we're not going to break into it. But there are some components that are outside of the TREC standards, and generally speaking, it's low voltage systems.
Okay.
So, intercom systems, security systems, even water softeners. While we have the ability to inspect those, it's not listed on the TREC standards.
Got you.
So if a customer, when they schedule, if they talk about the softener and the softener is an issue, we have some kits we can bring along and we can test the softener to make sure it's working.
Oh, nice.
Right. Now, septics, we do them as an extra.
Right.
Like if somebody has a septic.
Like an a la carte item.
Yeah. But then that kind of leads into sewer. I'll tell you, while technically in the TREC standards we inspect the sewer system, it's not really visible and not really accessible on a slab foundation. On a pier and beam, it's a little bit more accessible. You can crawl up under and look at it. But septics are the hardest system in the house to inspect from an inspection standpoint. And there's more and more that we're seeing and even recommending that they might employ a plumber to come out and run a camera up under that or do a hydrostatic test. So, and a plumber is going to be best suited to do that because they're going to run that camera all the way under and check all the lines instead of just doing the outside line. But that's a consideration because that system is really, really hard to inspect.
Let's just say, for example, you see a little bit of settling or maybe it seems like it's a little bit off. At what point are you going to recommend an engineer to go out there and take a peek at it?
But that's a great question and hard to answer.
I'm throwing them at you.
Yeah. Every house is different. So if you look at the engineering recommendations, it's 1% variance, right? If you have a 1% slope, because we're looking for cracks and door issues, but that's just a symptom of the problem. And the problem is really a deflection within the foundation. So we're looking for a 1% variance, and that can be over 10 feet, it can be over 20 feet, 30 feet. But if you're at a house that's 90 years old and you have a 1.5% deflection and you get to crawl up under it and look and you realize everything's supported, it's had movement in the past, but it's been repaired, then that's not going to trigger that.
Got you.
But if we go to a 3-year-old or 5-year-old or 10-year-old house and you have a 1% deflection and you can see some cracking coinciding with that, maybe some doors sticking, then we'll probably recommend a structural specialist to come.
Got you. And one of the things I like, and I've bought a new house myself, I always recommend getting a new home inspection done because you don't want to be sitting in the house 3 months later and looking at the wall wondering why it's crooked or whatnot. So what is it that you do on the new home side? Like,
love new homes, love the opportunity on new homes, and really a lot of builders appreciate it too because they're trying to do a punch out. You're trying to do a punch out. Of course, that builder, that superintendent might be running 10, 15, 20 houses at a time. He can't spend the time he'd probably like to at each one.
Right.
But that home inspector is going to come through and help complete that punch out list for him. So we see a lot of issues with insulation. In fact, it's well more than 75% of the new homes are short on insulation. Wow. And they can. That's a great time for the builder to get their insulator to come back and respray that. There's roof issues, once again, the out of sight, out of mind areas that nobody's getting up there to check it. And you might have areas of ridge cap shingles that are missing. I had, in fact, last week on one, the upper roof vents, they didn't install them when they did the roof. It may have been not shipped. And somebody had shipped them and all they did was go and tack them onto the roof and they were just sitting up there.
So they weren't
installed.
Out.
They weren't installed. So there's things, and nobody's going to see that from the ground. You're not going to see it walking around. So it's a great time to get it checked out. The builders appreciate it because A, they want to put out a good product. But second, everybody wants this house done before the person moves in. Because once they move in, now you have to schedule appointments.
Sure.
You can't just send your roofer back over or send an electrician back over. So it's so much easier on everybody if you can get it punched out beforehand.
So what are some of the common questions buyers ask you? I ask you lots of questions on behalf of my buyers, or because I just like to ask a lot of questions. But what are some of the things that they ask you that, everyone's thinking about, but they're just not asking, or, I know this is a silly question, Matt, but what do you think about this?
What I see is a lot of the buyers come in that they put some thought into it. They're worried about the three big categories:
Sure.
roof, foundation, and air conditioning. That's the big ones in San Antonio. So those tend to lead the list. And as we start doing the inspection, anything electrical.
Okay.
Because the average home buyer doesn't have a whole lot of knowledge about electrical. And B, when you start hearing electrical deficiencies, you're really concerned about electrical at that point. The electrical category is one of the reasons we really want that customer there, because electrical is really easy to explain when you're standing with them in the house,
right,
and really hard to put on a report to where they can understand it, because electrical codes change over time. And the Real Estate Commission and our rules want us to inspect, especially with regard to electrical, up to the current code in multiple categories.
Right.
So I'm going to a house that's 30 years old and talking about GFI rules that were put in 2020.
Sure.
And we have to put them on there, and I can help that customer explain, hey, this isn't a deficiency. Like, it wasn't built wrong, but it's a deficiency according to new codes, and you may want to consider upgrading. And that's one of the things that customers really, that buyers tend to trigger on and get worried about. So.
Right, and we have that argument all the time. What was code when the house was built versus code now? Is it grandfathered in? Is it not? Is it going to catch on fire? Probably not. It's just what is now happening, just in case something does, fall in water, it snaps, and then, no harm, no foul kind of deal.
Right. And it's a hard question to answer in print for a bunch of reasons, but one is we don't know the code when that house was built. Right. So you can say, well, the house was built in 1983, but the code that's in force is up to that city, which Universal City is different than San Antonio, which is different than Fair Oaks, which is different than Bernie. They'll all adopt codes at different times. So you might have on a 1983 house, you might have a 1981 code, but New Braunfels hadn't adopted it yet until 1984. So there's a lot of overlap and crisscrossing that goes on. But we can speak in more general terms and some specific terms about those codes when you're standing there with the homeowner.
Wow. Well, there you have it. Thank you, Matt Gessner, for all your help and all the insight. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We're always here to help. Thank you all so much. Have a blessed day, and we'll talk to you soon.